The Oberon buffs have arrived, and the hotfixes have likely slowed down, so now I think it's a good time to cover him. I got a couple of builds to show you in this video: a comfy Void Cascade level cap build template, a Steel Path energy tank, and an AoE Smite Nuke. So let's get started with the brand new Oberon's abilities. Starting with his passive. Oberon's old companion passive is completely gone. Now he will instead grant negation charges to allies within affinity range when he picks up a helpful universal orb. These charges can stack up to 3 times and act as a mini Revenant Mesmer skin. Each charge would negate an instance of damage and then provide 0.25 seconds of invulnerability. If the very last charge is consumed, it will instead grant 0.5 seconds of invulnerability. In the worst case scenario, this equates to the prevention of 3 instances of damage and a total of 1 second of iframes. Not all that powerful in a vacuum, but with Oberon's Reckoning, Arcane Universal Fallout, or other health orb generation, you can keep these charges up rather easily. Crowd control parkour moves will reduce enemies' likelihood of hitting you and also extend the effectiveness of Oberon's passive. So Smite has received the most mechanical changes with this touch-up. Casting Smite on an enemy will strip the target of any armor and overguard. The target will then take a percent of its current HP as radiation damage. A moment later, enemies within a radius around the target will take a percentage of the target's current health as radiation damage. The direct damage is capped at 75% of the target's HP with 215% strength. The AoE portion caps at 30% with 300% strength. So there are 2 important things to note with this ability. The ability uses the target's current HP, not its maximum. If you hit an enemy that is nearly dead, the damage you inflict on the target and in an AoE will be quite low. The second thing is that because it inflicts radiation damage, this damage is subject to faction damage modifiers. Orokin enemies will take half the expected damage, while Murmur enemies will take 50% more damage. This is also Oberon's Subsume ability. Although the direct damage and AoE damage is capped at 50% and 20% of the target's HP respectively for the Subsume version. Smite's augment is Smite Infusion. Hold casting will release an AoE granting a radiation damage buff to you and nearby allies. This augment is a fine choice if you want a bit of extra raw damage. However, this augment is not really that useful otherwise. Radiation itself is typically not the most desirable element for your weapons. Hallowed Ground also receives some nice quality of life changes. Casting Hallowed Ground will create a patch of radioactive grass and an AoE around Oberon. This ability requires that you be on the ground, so casting Route Airborne will force you back to the ground to complete the animation. Enemies that are on the grass will receive some radiation damage and a guaranteed radiation status effect every 0.5 seconds. You can have up to 3 of these grassy areas active at once. The damage ticks are independent of each area. If you stack these in one spot, you will apply radiation stacks much faster. This makes this ability great for both crowd control and activating Arcane Universal Fallout. While you are standing on or just above Hallowed Ground, you become immune to status effects. At about the height of a double jump, you will no longer be close enough for this status immunity. The augment for Hallowed Ground is Hallowed Eruption. Hallowed Ground receives a large bonus duration, and recasting will cause an explosion of radiation damage based on the remaining duration of the ability. However, you can only have 1 grassy area with this augment equipped. Personally, I'm not a fan of this augment. Limiting yourself to 1 area will drastically reduce your maximum coverage in a larger tile set, and it also doesn't scale particularly well. But if you need to just lazily nuke low-level enemies, it will do fine. Renewal was also on the receiving side of some quality of life. Renewal is a channeled ability with a fixed energy drain that will grant you and allies within affinity range an initial heal, a heal over time, and additional armor. While standing on Hallowed Ground, Renewal's heal over time is doubled. At 200% strength, the armor bonus from Oberon is capped at 100%, while granting allies 200% of that armor. If that is a little bit confusing, think of it like this. If you have 200% strength, Renewal would double your current armor. With your base 450 armor on Oberon Prime, you will receive an additional 100% of that armor, totaling 900. Since your allies receive 200% of your armor, they will also receive 900 additional armor, essentially meaning your allies gain additional armor equal to yours. Hopefully that makes some sense, because I know many people are confused by that, and we aren't done yet. Renewal also gives a bleed out slow, or at least it was supposed to. As of the time of this video, it is bugged and does nothing. My sacrifice revive tech is for the time being dead. Phoenix Renewal is the augment for Renewal, and it is pretty straightforward. You and allies will have lethal damage prevented while receiving brief invulnerability and a heal. There is a 60-second cooldown on this. This acts as death prevention for you and allies, and with Oberon's new passive, it'll be pretty difficult to die twice in a minute. Last up, we have Reckoning. Enemies within line of sight are picked up and slammed into the ground, receiving radiation damage and stripped of some of their armor. The damage is increased for each radiation status applied to the enemies. With a 60% base armor strip, you will need 167% strength to completely strip armor. For each enemy affected and each radiation status on the affected enemies, Reckoning will also provide some flat armor to Oberon, capped at 1000. Enemies affected by Reckoning also have a 50% chance to drop a health orb, fueling Oberon's passive. Hollowed Reckoning is another augment I'm not too fond of. Enemies affected by Reckoning will now create areas on the ground that deal radiation damage to enemies within the radius, and provide armor to allies that enter it. This augment comes with a bonus 40% range for Reckoning. The armor would be nice, but they do not overlap to create stacking bonuses. But there is your brief overview of Oberon's kit, so now let's take a look at some builds. I highly encourage you to tweak these builds for your own playstyle. These for the most part have a lot of flexibility, and Oberon being so versatile now opens up many different avenues for approaching builds. Starting with the build I run for Void Cascade. The goal with this build is to take advantage of Smite for one-tapping level cap frags or other tanky enemies like Eximus. Beyond that, the build just tries to be comfortable with enough defensive layers to make the game mode a chill experience. So let's talk helmet options. Really, you don't need one at all. But for this build, if you are going to use one, subsume over Reckoning, as we won't really need the AoE armor strip or the armor it provides. If you want more defenses, you can use Omamori or Silence. Omamori will grant 50% chance for enemy hits to be negated. Unfortunately, this won't stop your passive from being consumed, so it isn't as amazing as it could have been. Silence will shut down enemy Eximus abilities as well as acolytes, removing some of the more dangerous attacks you may have to handle. This also includes the more annoying attacks that frags do that grant them invulnerability. If you despise prime enemies like frags, use Roar. The extra ability damage it provides will let your Smite one-shot non-Orcan enemies. But experiment to see what you find most fun or useful. Void Cascade is not a very restrictive game mode, so you have endless possibilities. Archon Shards are really up to you. I would suggest Laser Cast Speed and Parkour Velocity for Void Cascade. Optionally, you can use at least 3 Tau Topaz Shards to one-shot enemies with Smite while they are affected by radiation status if you choose to not use Roar. In the Aura slot, I'll be using Growing Power for a bit of extra ability strength. If you don't want to use Augur mods on your build, you can use Brief Respite instead. You'll need a decent amount of strength for Smite, so get as close to that 215% strength threshold as you can. In this case, I'm using Blind Rage and a Tau Force Crimson Shard for ability strength. Rolling Guard, Catalyzing Shields, and Phoenix Renewal provide us with adequate defenses to pair with our passive. Rolling Guard is simply for iframes with a cleanse status if we end up in a bad situation. Catalyzing Shields will need to be paired with Brief Respite in the Aura slot, or Augur mods on either your secondary weapon or a Sentinel's weapon. This gives us the option to reset our shield gauge by casting Smite or Hollowed Ground. Not something you'll have to do very often, but if you want one more defensive layer, there you go. Phoenix Renewal just gives both us and teammates step prevention once every minute. Paired with our passive and crowd control from Hollowed Ground, we shouldn't die very often, if at all. Prime Continuity gives us some duration to make Hollowed Ground more comfortable to play around, and help offset some of the energy drain from Renewal. If you use any duration-based subsumes, you will get even more benefit. Range is kind of optional for this, but I'm using Overextended and Stretch. Range is primarily for Hollowed Ground since we aren't going out of our way to scale the AoE portion of Smite, though more range to keep enemies crowd controlled and consistently radiation procced for Universal Fallout is very helpful. I do run Prime Sure-Footed in my Exo slot. You do have status immunity from Hollowed Ground, but I tend to use Epitaph and Glaze while in the air, so I still manage to stagger myself here and there. You don't need it, and you're likely better off with anything else if you play differently, particularly Mar Parkour Velocity. Our Arcanes is as you can probably have guessed. Molt Augmented will provide additional ability strength to help us hit that 215% strength threshold as the mission goes on. Arcane Universal Fallout requires enemies affected by the radiation status from our abilities to have up to a 60% chance to drop Universal Orbs. This single-handedly stabilizes our energy economy and keeps our negation charges from our passive stacked up. You don't need a max one, but it does help. I'm still using Omamori in this footage, but it is vastly overkill. If I was going to stick to a defensive subsume, I'd probably swap the Silence instead. Oberon's innate defenses and Smite's ability to delete tanky single-target enemies covers the most difficult aspects of Void Cascade besides movement. All that's left to figure out is how are you going to handle trash mobs. The gameplay loop is pretty simple though. Prime tanky enemies and smite them if you are not using Roar, keep Hollowed Ground active to keep Universal Orbs dropping, keep Renewal active to protect yourself and your team, and use whatever weapons you like to deal trash mobs. Here are the Epitaph and Falcor builds I was running. And for the second build, I have a quick thinking energy tank Oberon. This build is probably a bit more interesting overall with how nicely it fits together. To be clear, this is a steel path tank, meant for more casual gameplay, not level cap. You may want a build like this for ETA or EDA, where some modifiers may limit your defenses and to help keep your teammates from going down. So let's talk about the core of the build, quick thinking. Quick thinking will prevent lethal damage at the cost of your energy, essentially meaning we are substituting HP with energy. The 240% efficiency is a multiplier to the effectiveness of your energy. Every 1 point of energy might as well be equivalent to 2.4 EHP. If you have 1000 energy, it's like having 2400 health. Speaking of 1000 energy, this build does use Arcane Battery. Every point of armor will grant 0.3 energy total to your maximum. With 3334 armor, we'll be able to reach this 1000 energy cap to act as our HP pool. So where does this armor come from? Well, we use health conversion. Health orbs will provide a stack of 450 armor. We can have 3 of these stacks granting a total 1350 armor. Universal Fallout and Reckoning will generate health orbs with high uptime on this buff. We also use Oberon's Reckoning to grant up to an additional 1000 flat armor. And don't forget about the 450 armor Oberon has at base. In total, that is 2800 armor. Since we have over 200% ability strength, Renewal grants an additional 100% armor. That brings our total to 5600 armor on Oberon and 5600 additional armor for allies within affinity range. That is nearly 95% damage reduction from armor alone. Adaptation gives us another layer of damage reduction, but don't expect it to have the full 90% all the time. Hunter Adrenaline isn't a very necessary mod, but it does let us leverage the healing from Renewal. If we are under constant fire, the health damage we take will give us energy. This is additional recovery on top of the orb drops to make sure you're topped off on energy if not from orbs. Stretch for a bit more range on hollow ground and to hit enemies with Reckoning, and then Phoenix Renewal again to make damn sure we don't die or to keep teammates extra safe. So let's talk subsume options for this build. Mirage's Eclipse or Nova's Northstars are your choices if you want to be even tankier via the damage reduction they provide. You can also use Nourish for additional damage, but also for the energy multiplier. This will let you recover energy faster to allow you to sustain more damage over time at the cost of your maximum hit. With the Eclipse version I am running, this build tops out at around 2.4 million EHP, which is more than enough for your base Steel Path content, though you can push this much higher if you really wanted. The last build we will look at are for nuking with Smite. Both of these builds are looking to get a ton of strength and range, with ideally topaz shards for additional radiation damage. We'll look at this damage decoy build first as I think it's more interesting, but to be completely honest it is clunky and not something I would play for anything more than fun. We subsume over Renewal with Loki's decoy since we need the rest of our kit. We will cast decoy on an enemy using the damage decoy augment. This draws enemy fire to the target and then reflects any damage other enemies inflict on it, with increased effect and additional status effects. However, we don't really care about that. What we do care about is that Decoy will increase the target's HP by a percentage of the enemies in the area. This will vastly increase our target's HP, which lets us do more damage to surrounding enemies with Smite. The full gameplay loop will require that you place Decoy on a tanky enemy, armor strip surrounding enemies with Reckoning, keep hollow ground up to rad proc enemies for Universal Fallout and or Topaz shards, then smite the target to nuke surrounding enemies. I would recommend you also bring a weapon or companions to help spread Viral to prime enemies for more consistent damage. If you want the basic version of this, well, you just subsume Roar over Renewal instead. The rest of the build is functionally the same, but we no longer need an augment so we get a mod slot back. Roar increases the damage of both weapons and abilities. Since you can't directly scale Smite beyond 75% of the target's HP, we have to work around that cap. With a 100% Roar, every Smite now does 150% of the target's HP, causing the direct hit to one-shot regardless of priming or topaz shards. This would also mean we are doing up to an equivalent 60% of the target's HP in an AoE. Add 5 Tau Forge shards for radiation damage, and now every nearby enemy takes 105% of the target's HP as damage. If you don't want to make that kind of shard investment, then you'll have to use viral priming for consistent nuking. The gameplay loop stays the same, just now you no longer need to bother with putting decoy on an enemy, just keep roll up at all times for big damage buff. If you wanted the nuke playstyle, this is what I would recommend you use. With all that said, I really wouldn't recommend playing around Smite nuking at base Steel Path, since enemies are frankly too squishy. You'll find yourself outright killing enemies with Reckoning the vast majority of the time due to the Roar buff. But I hope these builds serve as a starting point for you so that you can create the perfect Oberon builds for yourself. That's all I have for you in this one. Like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and as always, thanks for watching.